Next speaker is Neil Galehouse. He'll be speaking on the societal benefits of pavement preservation. Neil is an engineering specialist for the National Center for Pavement Preservation, where he develops content for training courses. Mr. Galehouse has previously worked for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, the City of Lansing, Michigan, and Parker's Brinkerhoff. He is a graduate of Michigan State University, where he received a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and North Carolina State University, where he received a master's degree in public administration. He is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Michigan and the state of North Carolina. Please help me welcome Neil to the podium.
Good afternoon. In starting my presentation today, I'm going to go back to 1956. In 1956, Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act, which began the interstate system. So from that act, we've developed a large road network that includes today 47,000 miles of interstate and a number of other U.S. routes and state highways. So this network has provided society a number of benefits that we often overlook. So today I'm going to talk about some of those benefits, what they are, and talk about the impact that they have and the role we play in maintaining that system. So to give you a quick outline, we'll talk about social impacts, which are impacts to people, economic impacts, which are the financial impacts to businesses and individuals. And then we'll talk about the social and economic benefits of pavement preservation. And there's a distinct set of benefits we get when we do preservation relative to construction. And finally, we'll talk about marketing the potential of preservation. The theme of our conference is continuing the drive for change. So part of that we do here. We learn and we share, and when we go back, we need to be able to explain those benefits to others, whether they're in our workplace or explaining those benefits to the public. So social impacts. I'm going to begin with the definitions. Social impacts are the effect of an activity on the social fabric of communities and the well-being of individuals and families. So looking at these social impacts, first we have democratization of mobility. And the highway system has allowed people to go where they want, when they want. And if we think back, there was a time when people didn't have the ability to do this. At one time, there were few options for travel, and people were largely confined to their community. There was a time when people often took the railroad to get from one place to another. And for those who traveled by road, that didn't resemble the road network, the highway network that we have today. Speeds were slow. A lot of times people were traveling under 45 miles an hour. They'd come to towns and rural areas. A lot of times they'd have speed traps, maybe a 15 or 25 mile an hour speed limit. They'd have cars pulling in and out, trucks pulling in and out. There were no limited access roadways. So now we have much more mobility and easier travel between places. We also have expanded residential freedom. At one time, people had to live where they worked. And because of the interstate system, these communities have sprung up around city centers, and people have been able to choose where they live and feel that they had a reliable system to get them where they needed to go. So people could choose to live in places that had safe neighborhoods, better schools, scenic views, or peace and quiet, but they still were connected to the cities. In the same way that they had expanded residential options, they also had expanded employment options. People who lived in small towns generally weren't able to get to the city so that they could have regular employment. It took too long to get there. In the same way, people in inner cities may have not been able to have jobs across town. Going across the inner city, they'd have stoplights, and again, it would be a much longer commute to work. So because of this, people have been able to expand their options into a larger area. So as a result, employees are able to have better jobs, have better wages, and employers are also able to recruit from a deeper pool of potential employees. We also have lower retail prices. At one time, people were dependent on local merchants to provide their goods. So the selection was limited and prices were high. Because of the highway system, people are able to travel and shop and find the selection they're looking for and the prices they need. We have leisure activities and vacations. And so people are able to drive out of town to attend events and go to destinations several hours away. Weekend getaways to the beach, trips to the cabin, out-of-town festivals. It's not uncommon for people to pack up their car and take a cross-country trip. We also have national defense. When the Federal Aid Highway Act was passed, it was commonly referred to as the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act. And so the act was passed during the Cold War and was really the rationale behind getting the bill passed. But the people understood that there was a need to provide a redundant network of roads to move our troops and our military equipment across the country. If you notice the clearance on a lot of the overpasses for the interstates across the country, that was done in concurrence with the military so that they had a way to move missiles and tanks and other military equipment and be able to fit under those overpasses. Now we're going to move on to economic impacts. And the economic impacts are defined as the effects of commerce on employment or incomes produced by a decision, event, or policy. And for our economic impacts, we have increased economic growth. And so the ease of freight transport by highway has allowed us to lower our transportation cost and encourage job creation, as well as promoting commercial expansion. So today, roughly 60% of the tonnage of goods in this country are transported exclusively by road. And when we think about the number of goods in addition that are transported partially on roads, be it to a port or from a railroad, we're well in excess of 90% of our goods. So it's clear that our economy can't function without a good highway system. We also have higher workplace productivity. Because the ease of travel on the highway system, people are generally able to work a typical 8 to 5 shift. If an employer needs an employee to work extra hours or be flexible in their time, they're generally able to do so because they're not relying on a system such as a railroad or other transit system that has a somewhat rigid schedule. If an employer needs employee to work overtime, it's generally not a problem. So that helps higher work productivity and improves employers. We have more trade and exchange, and so that has expanded the number of potential customers who can be reached. We don't have to have customers in a local area. They can be across the country or around the world. Manufacturers and companies are able to take their goods and they can put them on the highway and send them down to the port and ship them overseas. We also have lower business costs. A highly reliable, high-speed road network has reduced transit time and reduced transportation cost. Some of you may have seen this graphic before, but it comes from the ASCE Failure to Act series, and this is highlights some of the costs associated with not maintaining our infrastructure. So they've looked at the implications of not maintaining that system between now and 2020. So it begins by saying American families would earn $700 less each year. And that really comes from the cost to companies of not receiving their raw materials in time, being able to manufacture their product. And so because they're less productive, they're able to employ less workers, and so the average wage for a person decreases. And so they've quantified that as $700 less each year per family. And these rough roads would also cost $360 more each year, and that's taking into account flat tires, wheels, suspensions, anything caused by the damage on our roads. So that total amounts to $1,060 per year per family. And when we talk about this $700 less each year, that translates into 877,000 jobs across the country. And another 234,000 would only exist if some of that workforce agreed to a pay cut. And when we total these costs between now and 2020, transportation costs would increase by $430 billion. We would also lose ground in the global economy. They've quantified that as a reduction in exports by $28 billion, and our exports drop in 79 of 93 different tradable commodities. And so our total underperformance in our gross domestic product is $3.1 trillion. And so we've talked about the social and economic benefits of our highway system. And when we think about the social and economic benefits, we really need to think about how we're going to balance them. Anything we do to maintain our highway system has to be financially viable, but we also have to respect the social impact at the same time. Even though one may outweigh the other, we have to try to balance our approach. If I was to give you an example, I might say that a community out there has produced mine tailings as a byproduct of some mining industry. And the community may want to use those tailings and convert it into a usable product somewhere. So perhaps they've decided that that can be used as a mineral filler in a microsurfacing project. And so there's social benefits to the community in doing that, but we have to assess whether that's financially viable. It may be that using this mineral filler doesn't effectively extend the life of the pavement. So both of these have to be weighed and they have to be balanced as best we can. So the big news we have is that by detailed planning or accident, preservation offers a way to satisfy the social and economic demands of our society. In addition, preservation produces a number of unique benefits relative to reconstruction. And to start off talking about these benefits, I want to recognize that there's a paradigm shift that's occurring within agencies today. And this comes about due to the performance measures of MAP 21 and the FAST Act. And so agencies are beginning to be held accountable for the condition of their road network, and they need to be able to meet performance targets in order to receive full federal funding. And so in order to meet these condition targets, agencies are going to have an asset management plan. And when they develop this asset management plan, we want to take into account the investment, and we want to be able to extend the life to minimize our whole life cost. We also want to operate in a financially sustainable manner. And in that, we're talking about putting our funds into cost-effective maintenance activities. And finally, we want to create a framework to improve performance on a long-term basis. And so with preservation, we have a lower frequency of construction. And this is fairly straightforward, but if we're focused on a worst first approach and we have a handful of projects, it's not going to leave money there for maintenance and preservation. But if we routinely perform preservation treatments on roads in good condition, we can defer costly rehabilitation and reconstruction. With preservation, we have increased level of service. And level of service is defined as the condition level that should be maintained on a particular component of the highway system. And what we need to remember is there's costs associated with each level of service. The higher level of service you have, the more it's going to cost. And so one example of this is roadside mowing. We all recognize that we need to maintain a certain level of mowing on our highways. If we let the grass grow and we don't keep it cut, obviously it's unsightly. There's safety issues. We could have to worry about animals jumping out in the road in front of everybody. So we recognize that there's a need to have a certain level of service with that component. But if we were to think about maintaining that to the same level we have on our yards at home, that would be very expensive. We can't afford to do that. When we're talking about roads, people want to have a smooth ride. And to meet performance measures, the ride quality has to meet a certain condition. But if you want to bring a road to the highest level of service, you can't afford to reconstruct your way to that point. The public has expectations of what level of service they want to have on their road network, but those expectations need to be balanced with cost. If we want to bring our condition to the highest level at the lowest cost, we're going to achieve that by doing preservation. We also have a higher average remaining service life. And the remaining service life is the amount of time pavement has until it reaches an unacceptable condition requiring reconstruction. Now, our pavement is going to reach an unacceptable level of service, at least to the public, before the remaining service life is zero. But if we were to think about taking our remaining service life and increasing it across the network, that result is similar to banking our resources and creating a funding reserve. We're deferring that costly project farther out into the future. And so to increase the remaining service life across the network, we really need to have a mix of fixes. And that mix includes pavement preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. We can't get by doing one or two of these. We really need to do all three. There should be some rehabilitation, some reconstruction, and a lot of preservation. So here we have a graph that's showing the cost of delaying pavement preservation. And on our y-axis, we've got cost per lane mile, and on our x-axis, we've got condition. So we've got a good, area, fair, and poor. And here on this line, we've got expenditure on preservation. And in this line, we have our road user cost. And so we can see that when we have a high expenditure on preservation, the cost to our road user is low. We don't have a road user cost that's zero because there's always going to be cost to maintain their vehicle. There's going to be oil changes, new tires, things like that. But as our expenditures on pavement preservation decrease, we can see that the condition of our road network is also decreasing. So it drops off fairly dramatically. When we're not spending that money, we have a poor road condition. But we also notice at the same time the cost to our road users is going up. And so we're not only incurring costs that we're paying down the road in terms of reconstruction, but we're also transferring these costs onto the user. So they're having to pay for the damaged vehicles when we're not maintaining the system. And so this ties in a bit with the last slide, but we have lower road user costs. In addition to what we discussed on the last slide, poor roads result in reduced vehicle speed, negatively affecting fuel consumption. So if you're having to drive through an area at 10 or 20 miles an hour because it's full of potholes or it's a really rough ride, you're actually getting worse gas mileage than you would if you were able to drive 35 or 45. By that same token, if you were having to take detours because of rough road, you're also unnecessarily burning fuel. Preservation offers higher travel time reliability. For manufacturers, this is critical. How many people are familiar with the term just-in-time delivery? So for manufacturing, these manufacturers receive their components just before they need to be on the assembly line. And so that minimizes the need for warehousing, and so it reduces their cost and makes them more competitive. And so through preservation, we have shorter lane closures. People are able to get between places more reliably. Furthermore, when we're doing preservation, these delays are lasting a day or 2 days, maybe even part of a day, whereas with reconstruction, they're going on for months, possibly years at a time. And so with preservation, we have reduced travel delays. When we have a reconstruction project, obviously, there's lots of delays. Got a picture here on this slide of a barrel monster. When you're out on a preservation project, you're not likely to see a barrel monster. But through preservation, we're able to reduce queues, decrease congestion, and eliminate detours. We also have less energy required. And there's less energy required for preservation because, one, there's less machinery we're using to complete the work. And the crews are out working for a shorter duration of time. Again, we're talking about days versus months or maybe even years. There's also less energy required from a material sense. We're not going out there and extracting new raw material from the ground, refining it, making it into a usable product, and transporting it to the site. There's much less of that. And since energy is a limited resource in a societal sense, doing reconstruction is also a social cost. And so the less energy requirement is both a social and an economic impact to consider. We also have recycling. Through preservation, we're able to use RAP or reclaimed asphalt pavement, as well as doing in-place recycling. And RAP is something that's becoming more common with modern recycling techniques. States are continually experimenting with greater quantities of RAP in their pavement. RAP is also beginning to be used in chip seal and slurry seals. We also have greater sustainability. And sustainability is defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so there's three parts to sustainability. We've got economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. And we really need to think of them as three legs on a stool. We need to have all three of them in an equal amount to be balanced upright. And so economic sustainability, if we think about a practice of an agency such that today they've got a pavement condition of 40% good, 40% fair, 20% poor. And we think about the maintenance practices they use over the next few years. If they use practices such that 20 years from now they've got 20% of their roads in good condition, 30% in fair condition, and 50% in poor condition, we're not operating in a sustainable manner. We're putting those costs and the burden on to the next generation. And so we want to be able to give them the same opportunity to succeed that we have today. In environmental sustainability, we're talking about promoting the use of preservation treatments that reduce the consumption of materials and reduce waste. And finally, social sustainability, again, we're ensuring a smooth pavement that reduces user delay and supports mobility. We also have diminished vehicle crashes. Preservation is a tremendous safety benefit. By reducing the duration and the length of work zones, we're able to provide a safer work environment for work crews and more safety for the public. In terms of preservation, a good contractor, when, for example, a microsurfacing, they're moving down the road, a lot of times they're able to move that lane closure along with them. So they're not leaving a 8 or 10 mile long lane closure like you may have with the reconstruction project. It's short in duration, but it's also short in length. Preservation also offers decreased noise duration. Now, noise is a nuisance to nearby residents, but if we think about construction projects, particularly in urban areas, there's a need to perform projects at night, and this is due to traffic concerns. They can't be out during the day when they've got these really high traffic volumes, and so they put the work off until nighttime. But work at night has chronic noise exposure causes health problems to the surrounding community, and it can also violate noise ordinances. Preservation also produces less greenhouse gas. So if you're using preservation treatments, you're probably generating somewhere between 1% to 10% of the total CO2 emissions than you would be if you were doing a brand new construction project. And a lot of that has to do with the duration of the treatment, but there's also benefits to some of these treatments themselves in terms of CO2 emissions. So by using preservation, it's a tremendous benefit to the environment. We also have more job creation. When you're letting a contract for pavement preservation, a much greater percentage of each dollar is going towards the worker because there's less material that's needed on the job. We've got less aggregate, less binder, and less equipment. So as a result, that money is going towards manpower, so it's better for the economy. And so now I'm going to move into talking about marketing the benefits of preservation. You know, a lot of us get questions from the public about, why are you doing this road that's in good shape where, well, my road over here is in terrible shape and you're doing nothing about it. So we all get those questions. But if we're really going to be successful in gaining greater acceptance of preservation, we need to think about getting the word out to others. And so we need to have grassroots support. We need to find people in our communities that are going to be champions of preservation. But we also have to develop a strategy to reach the public on the benefits of preservation. So I suggest, as a reminder, that after 3 days, people remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they see, and 65% of what they hear and see. So today we're doing a presentation. You can see my slides. I'm talking about what's on the slides. And so that's one way to get the message across. But maybe you're going to go back to your agency and put together a marketing video. And people will be able to see what you're talking about and hear you narrate your voice. And so it's a good way to effectively communicate your message. But we should also think about developing a marketing strategy. And one of the key points in developing a marketing strategy is associating with the person's location or emotions. Most of the public out there is aware of things like noisy construction projects, detours, potholes, rough ride. It's a very easily relatable subject for them. So when we talk about preservation and the benefits of preservation, at the end, we'd like to get them to say, that's a great idea. We should go out and start doing some of this preservation. We should also remember that each of us is a good way to market preservation ourselves. We all know people who know us as engineers or contractors or suppliers. They see us as an expert about our road network. So when you see people through social gatherings, through church, through recreational activities, use that opportunity to tell them about preservation and what the benefits are. It's a good way to leverage your relationship to help spread the message. So in summary, preservation offers social and economic benefits and a great story to tell. And so we need to take this message forward back to our agencies and back to the public so that we can help continue to drive for change. Questions?
I do actually, Neil. On your slide where you had the graph for road user costs versus preservation funding, was that representative of an optimization curve where they intersect? That would be the optimal amount of money. I mean, I know that's hypothetical there without any necessarily numbers behind it, but does that represent that type of analysis where you're looking for a means to develop the funding level that will minimize, the road user cost with what your budgets are?
Well, actually, we saw them cross at a point where it was really in the fair category.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not the optimum point. We want to keep our costs high so that we can keep our user costs as low as we can.
I didn't know if that's what it meant to do. I mean, it's something I've stuck in my mind since microeconomics in college, and I love those because it gives you a number. It's a tool to say, yeah, this is how I got the value that we're using. And lots of times it is related to what you can afford versus what you can accomplish with that money. So, any other questions? Dr. Adams has to leave, so.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed that presentation. That was a nice summary. So since your dad's not allowed to ask the question, I will. All right. So, which is the same one he asked me. But so, can you help us a little bit understand the issues of pavement preservation with relation to disadvantaged population groups?
Well, I think some of that goes back to the cost that we see for the users of the system. We want to make an affordable means for people to get between places. And so some of them don't live in areas where they're able to access mass transit. And so if they're in those areas, they're reliable on a vehicle to get there. And so if we've got a road network that there's high costs in terms of potholes and rough road that's going to cause damage to their vehicle, then it's affecting them more than people of greater means, because they can't afford to have their car in the shop for repair. They might, $1,000 repair bill might be a few weeks of money to them. So
Okay, thanks.
Neil, I appreciate your comment on the marketing and some of those ideas on where that can happen. And I know that our agency's used some social media to try to put together examples of what we've been doing to push that out to the public in a mass way. Are you finding other communities that are finding success with social media or campaigns, or what ways are they delivering these marketing videos or materials that they're finding success to gain that public support?
Certainly social media is part of that, Facebook, Twitter, but I think some of the greatest response, at least for us, we've received is through doing videos. Anytime you can get somebody to sit down and put together a video that really visually conveys the information to someone and makes it easier to understand, the better you're going to do. I think naturally people are interested in watching things, so at least for us, we've had a good response with that. So I would encourage you to think about YouTube or some other form of sending out that information. And you may do that through create a video and put it on Facebook or something like that.
My comment is that there's a certain irony here. In a situation where you can reduce the amount of disruption because you've increased the time between initial construction and reconstruction, the beneficiaries of that may not live in that area. They may live 20, 30, 40 miles away. And in fact, the neighbors in there may not benefit from that. In fact, if you were to, the ironic part of that is if you were to reconstruct more frequently, then there would be less noise, there'd be less impacts on the perhaps the local people who lived around there, because there wouldn't be all that traffic going through. So there's pluses and minuses all the way through this thing. You've got to look at it that way. And then going back to that curve again, or at least that those intersecting relationships there, you can add the vertical values of those two curves, and you'll end up with as you said, an actual curve itself, which will have a minimum, which may not be at the intersection point. That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.